Who are we, you ask? We are the podcast seeking out a better understanding of all things paranormal. We'll have guests from all backgrounds in the paranormal with us along this journey, with Q&As for listeners to ask paranormal experts their questions, and open call-in nights to let listeners discuss their thoughts and experiences on the paranormal. But the question remains, can the unexplained be explained? Or can the paranormal be nothing more than perception? So, close the curtains and turn out the lights and join us on the journey into the paranormal. This is Paranormal Engaged with your host, Adam Young, coming to you from the beautiful Evergreen State.
And welcome back once again to Paranormal Engaged. And tonight we have Jeff Harmon with us. Jeff is a second-generation astrologer, spiritual consultant, and exorcist/property clearer for over 40 years. He believes conscious self-awareness can lead us out of our matrix of our karmic past, and where the soul's journey is revealed in ancient systems of classical, Vedic, and Kabbalistic astrology. Harmon offers detailed personal and business readings, including location astrology. He also offers corrective measures and works with clients to design custom, natural, untreated gemstone talismans. He has solved many paranormal cases involving haunted dwellings, UFO-related events, and possession. He has cleared people, homes, and commercial spaces experiencing negative spiritual attachments, and has assisted treasure hunters in deciding if, when, and where to dig. Concurrently, Harmon also worked in many areas of the entertainment industry. He has patented technology and has contracted to perform forensic work in association with many federal, state, and local government agencies as a sound expert. Jeff, welcome. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
So, Jeff, what got you into astrology?
My mother introduced me to it, and I was actually pretty skeptical of it at the time. And she said, before you debunk it, give it a chance. And I did. And I was actually really impressed because she was telling me how certain girlfriends would be. And I thought that, how could you know that? And her accuracy was pretty interesting. So that intrigued me. So then through the 80s, and particularly in the 90s, I really delved into a lot of ancient translations and started doing a lot of this. And it really kind of found me. So I'd say the last quarter of a century for sure, I've been doing it almost full time. And it's something I always try and take a break from, but it keeps chasing me. Everybody likes it, so I keep doing it. It's a lot of fun.
So you work with classical, Vedic, and Kabbalistic astrology. So what are they, and kind of how do they differ from one another?
Well, I think, that's a very complex subject. I think what would really differentiates these ancient types of methods is they're a lot more astronomical and scientific than modern astrology. I'm not saying that modern astrology isn't good, but Vedic astrology, Egyptian, Hellenistic, and classical astrology are all more older sciences that had never varied for many thousands of years. And ever since, I'd say, the late 1800s with the spiritual movement, we've kind of, we've had the discovery of the new planets, Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto. And it's really evolved into a very pop culture of everyone knows their sun sign. And ancient astrology, certainly looked at your sun sign, but it didn't call you your sun sign. So, in fact, the philosophy behind the more older types of astrology appealed to me because it really looked at who we are. We're really spiritual beings as having a physical experience. And no matter what your spiritual or religious belief is, that fit a lot more with me. And it also puts us more in empowerment instead of astrology predicting predicting, quote unquote, the future. It more is an energy that we look at that influences the future. I mean, ultimately, we're the arbiter of our future. So I really looked at it, I think, with a much more favorable view as I got into it. Today, a lot of people are astonished to find that their sun sign isn't the same in Vedic astrology often. And that's very, often disturbing to people, because I think pop culture has made modern astrology so much like, oh, I'm a Pisces, I'm an Aries, I'm a this. And modern astrology tends to dwell on that so heavily that, there's no room for anything else. And I think that's really what I call love, light, and cluelessness. It's the love and light's fine, but it's the cluelessness. And I really, Vedic astrology really looks at who you are, again, as the path of your soul. And it looks into cycles that are extremely powerful and very, very interesting. So I really enjoy it. The other thing I look at, too, is location astrology combined also with electional astrology. Like, we do a lot of real estate elections, like when to list a property. I actually work with people too, like times to schedule a surgery. You can't get a doctor to agree for the most part on astrology, but you certainly can pick the day that's good for you. And there's a lot of usages for that: signing contracts, surgery, real estate elections, trips, all kinds of stuff. Of course, right now, not too many people are traveling, but that'll change. That's all coming up. I was actually amazed at how much the astrology, it's called mundane astrology, showed how accurate this crazy time we're in with the COVID-19 and the world at large, how accurate it showed it.
So
pretty amazing.
It is absolutely amazing. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the investigation techniques in regards to the natal astrology. How do you use astrology to come about that?
Well, in terms of investigation, now you're talking about like paranormal things in terms of like places that may have paranormal activity and problems like that. Is that what you're speaking about?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, what I use is a type of astrology that's called interrogation astrology. And that is known by a lot of modern astrologers as horary astrology, which is a Latinized term for divinational astrology. And in the East, Vedic astrology calls it prashna. They're all one and the same. And I get this all the time where people say, geez, we've got paranormal activity. We feel the place has a ghost, or we have strange paranormal activity going on. And you can actually cast charts for the moment. It's not a birth chart. It's for the moment that you cast it, and see if it is in fact happening. And you get a really clear read as to what's happening there. And then often I use electional astrology to pick a time at which to clear the place. It's very powerful. So and I also do have to add, you can use a person's birth chart to see if there are cycles that are going on. And that's one of the things I notice a lot over the years is people tend to have strange things happening to them when they have certain cycles that warrant that. And there are a number of different types of cycles that can warrant that. Like I've had a lot of people who've had some very trying times, both either psychologically or paranormally, where you can really see that in the chart, in the cycles.
Okay.
And that's using the birth chart.
So let's talk about dynamic analysis of transits, various progressions, and dasha periods.
Well, that kind of stuff's going on for everyone all the time. And in a reading, that's one of the first things that I look at is what cycles people are going through. And when you talk about dynamic things like that, that's exactly what that is. There's many types of progressions called, solar arc directions. There's primary directions, and there's secondaries. And this stuff gets very complex. And I usually don't tell people too much about it when I'm, how it works during readings, unless they want to know. But those are the tools that are definitely good to use. And I do show people that. What's so wonderful today is with Zoom and also many of the video conferencing programs, people can actually join right on with me in a reading and see that. The same thing goes for those types of dynamic cycles where you live, particularly if you move somewhere other than where you were born. That's location astrology really shines in that area. Like, for instance, if you were born in a particular place and you move somewhere else, and it's particularly if it's a great distance from where you live, as you move far east or west or north or south, you're going to drastically change the timing of your transits and progressions. So that also becomes like a secondary chart to the birth chart. And I know I'm experiencing that right now. I, of course, live a couple thousand miles west of where I was born, and I really feel the changes of the transits. So it's fun stuff to look at, and I like it because it helps people see and empower them to what the energies are that are going on. And I always feel that you, just like driving a car, if you see something coming at you, you're likely to react much more appropriately when you know what it is.
Right. I'm better prepared.
Yeah, exactly. It's all energy. It's like they teach you in martial arts. You know, if you understand that, you know, when someone's throwing a punch or a kick at you, you might want to get out of the way or deflect it somehow, you're going to react much more appropriately. And same thing goes when you have good things happening. You know, someone's of course, we're not allowed to shake hands anymore with the COVID-19. But you know, when someone's being friendly to you, you know, you want to receive that as well. So it's all energy, and it's a very fun thing to examine. It's another viewpoint at looking at psychology and life. You know.
Mm-hmm. So interrogation astrology you had mentioned earlier. What exactly is that, and what do you use that for?
Well, that's a tool that you can use for just about anything. I have people calling up and talking about their pets, animals. You can look at things that are ailing you. You can use it for diagnosis of energetic imbalances in the body. You know, again, I can't give medical advice, nor will I. But I have found that when people use it also approaches a subject called Ayurveda, which many people may be familiar with. You could take the 4 pulses, but also you can do that with astrology. You can see when there's times there's imbalances. And when you couple that with either allopathic or naturopathic doctors, it can be a really good viewpoint to see another angle at what is wrong. So you can use interrogation astrology for just about anything. You can, you know, I could tell so many stories. I've had people have missing money, thefts. They can ask questions about a business partner. Is it in my best interest to go in business with so-and-so? Or is this relationship happening? You know, I've actually seen it where people have asked me questions like, is so-and-so playing around on me? And I'll look at the chart and say yes or no, depending on the chart. And then they'll later call me back and say, well, it was right. You know, they weren't playing around on me when I thought they were, or they were, you know, playing around. So it's a really interesting tool. A lot of people think that it's predicting the future, but it's not. It's really predicting probable outcomes based on what people's consciousness are at the time. It's kind of like viewing into the interactive consciousness of what's happening. And it's a very useful tool. Like, you know, here's a great example. Not too long ago, I lost a very important bundle of keys. I was taking my son's motorcycle over to his friend's house, and I put the keys on the bumper of the truck and forgot to put them in my pocket. Well, then I take off, and I had 4 miles across town to drop his motorcycle off. They were going dirt bike riding up in Mojave. So they were taking the truck from his place. So I drop the bike off. I get back home, and then I go, oh, geez, I lost the keys. So I drove back and forth that 4-mile stretch, hoping to find them, could not find them. I spent like 2 hours. And then I came back home and I said, okay, I need to know, am I going to find these keys or not? And where are they? So I cast a chart in possessions of the second house. And immediately it said, you're going to find them. And they're not close, but they're about a little more than halfway there. And you can see by the signet factors in the chart. So this time I got smart. I jumped on my motorcycle because a motorcycle you can see a lot easier than you can in a car because you're not looking over the hood, around the corners.
Mm-hmm.
So I rode my motorcycle, and sure enough, going up this hill right next to a school, I found the keys completely intact, and I had remotes on that thing. I even had an electronic remote starter for a generator. I really needed these keys because they go with my film rig. And thank God I found them, because that would have been a colossal task to replace all those keys, even though I did have some duplicates. So that's how astrology can be used. It can be used for all kinds of things, And I've had people call up, here's a great story. I had a guy call me up one time. He said, he says, I'm thinking about leaving my wife and my kids. I've got a secretary who I fell in love with, and I'm thinking about, just telling my wife and going to be with her. And I said, okay, well, how do you want me to help you? Well, I want to know, is she going to really be right for me? Is she going to be with me? And I said, well, let me cast a chart and see. So I did. The wife is the 7th house, the lover's the 5th. So I said, I said, she's not going to be with you, meaning the lover. I said, she's going off with somebody else. He said, well, you're crazy. So how could that be? He said, please. He said, I'm in love and we're in love. We can't keep our hands off each other. I said, well, that may be, but the chart says she's going off with somebody else. So he pays me, hangs up the phone, thought I was nuts, calls me back about a month or so later and says, oh my God. He says, I can't believe it. She went and married some guy in another state. I said, well, there you have it.
Right.
So the charts are usually right. The only time I have ever been wrong is if I read them wrong, and I try not to read them wrong. Mm-hmm. But it's almost, I always say, forget Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus. This may be the real interactive conscious matrix here. It's pretty wild. It's actually amazed me how accurate it is.
So, you're talking about casting a chart. So, when you're doing this and you're looking at these, how are you casting these charts?
Well, I mean, the mechanics of astrology is complex, but it's based on, well, if it's an interrogation chart, it's cast at the moment in time I understand the question. That's the ancient method.
Okay.
So wherever I happen to be at that longitude and latitude, I cast the chart at that time when I fully understand what someone's asking.
Okay.
Like today, I had 2 people overseas. I have one here in the States, but they'll ask questions, and I'm literally casting the chart for where I am, even though they may be sitting, somewhere in Europe or somewhere over in, Australia or wherever in Asia. You just cast the chart for where you understand it. The eastern horizon becomes the querent, meaning the person asking the question. And then in astrology, there's 12 houses. Each house rules a specific area of life. Like money is the 2nd house, right? Siblings, neighbors is the 3rd house. Home, family, real estate is the 4th. 5th is speculation, stocks, all that kind of stuff. Lovers. 6th is animals, pets, health. It's all, the 7th is partnerships and relationships, you see? So it goes all the way, like career. I get a lot of questions about career. Do you think my boss is going to fire me? Do you think I'll go back to work? So the 10th house is always career. It's also achievement, recognition, reputation as well. 11th house is groups and friends. Paranormal stuff really enters in on the 12th house. Is this place, am I possessed? Well, if the ruler of the 12th house is in hard aspect to the ascendant, you got trouble. And the moon is always co-ruler of the question. But see, here's the difference. In modern astrology, modern astrologers use a different zodiac. They're using a modernized zodiac. The ancient, traditional, and Vedic astrology uses a zodiac that's very specific and hasn't changed for thousands of years. That all got changed in the 1800s. Now, modern astrologers will tell you Pluto rules Scorpio, Neptune, Neptune rules Pisces and Uranus, Aquarius. But you can't do that in traditional astrology. Mm-hmm. You can certainly use those planets, but you can't make them rule anything. So it's a whole more traditional set of rules. And it's not better because it's old. It's better because it's a system that has not been messed with. It's a very astronomical system. It's really astronomy. In fact, prior to the 1700s, astronomy and astrology were one. Galileo, so many Copernicus, many of these people were all what today we would call an astrologer, even though they were studying the heavens and called astronomers.
Right, and if I
You know,
if I'm and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the Mayan calendar also used astrology very heavily when they were doing
it
theirs.
did. It did. That was different. And the Mayan calendar is, again, I remember the Mayan calendar. Oh my God.
Mhm.
I was on so many radio shows for a long time ago. Everyone said, is the world going to end at the end of the Mayan calendar? And I said, no. I said, I don't get it. And of course, 2012, everyone was buying ammunition, holes in the ground, and all the food they could muster.
Mhm.
And nothing happened. Nothing happened. Now is the time I would say is good. I'm not demeaning the Mayan calendar, but the problem with the Mayan calendar is it's been really a decimated culture. And I know several really intelligent researchers who have gone down there and done great research. And I think there's a lot of merit to some of the Mayan techniques. But the problem is the calendars are very hard to interpret, and there's different viewpoints by certain scholars. So I find traditional astrology, which actually they claim goes all the way back to the beginning of what humans might call time for humans, and that was the Adamic times or the Enochian times, the Enoch, and pre-Diluvians, way back there. One of the oldest texts in astrology is known as the Sefer Ratziel. And that's actually, Sefer means book in Aramaic and Hebrew, and Ratziel is the archangel Ratziel. And it was believed to be given to Adam when we fell down into this dimension, if you will, or physicality. And that's an astonishing book. There's several translations, but it talks about how angels rule and spirits rule all these different planets. And the skeptics, I always say, well, you better take a close look at the Western Bible, because Exodus has 72 angels specifically permeated and named inside of there, and those permeate the zodiac.
Mm-hmm.
And even though astronomers laugh at astrology, they say, well, the zodiacs don't match the actual constellations. Well, they're right. They never did. And then you take the precession of the equinoxes, which is the sidereal zodiac.
Mm-hmm.
It's even more different. And then further, you take the lunar zodiac, which surrounds the Earth, and God forbid, no one's going to find that one on a telescope. These are all very ancient spiritual constructs that can't be explained any other way than through spiritual methods.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the Bible specifically cites the Shem HaMephorash, which are the 72 angels that surround the firmament of the earth. And pretty cool stuff. And this stuff, if you go back into some of these ancient texts, is really, really quite astounding.
It is. So when you're using astrolocation, astronomy, and stuff like that, in your experience, when they come to you, what exactly are they asking for and wanting you to check and use astrology for?
Well, I mean, anyone who would want to use location astrology is always looking to find a place that's better for them. And I've actually found that's been an area people have been very interested of late, because a lot of times people are in locations or situations, especially with this COVID thing, they're thinking about relocating or getting to a better place. Location astrology is really amazing. What it does is it's different for every single person, because it's based off the time you were born. So it extrapolates the energy specific to you across the globe. And, most folks in the United States kind of want to stay in the United States. But I have a lot of folks who have left the United States, expatriates, or they want by location, they want to go to South America or Europe or wherever they go. And I've also had a lot of people who've moved here. So looking at location astrology is really fascinating, because you get way more specificity than find me the best place. Well, best and bad aren't really very descriptive terms. Mm-hmm. Or find me a good place. Well, with location astrology, you can go way past that. You can actually find, like, if people move to sun lines. I've had doctors who've said to me, geez, Jeff, I'm dying. What can I do? Where would be a place that might bring me some healing? Sun ascending line. So I find them a sun ascending line. And if they have the wherewithal to get there and it's not in the middle of the ocean, they go find it. And I have had a lot of reports from people that whether they were professionals or just people like you and me, they have found great healing when they get to better lines, such as sun lines. The Jupiter lines are very spiritual. Venus lines are very pleasurable. So people always, we're creatures of seeking pleasure. So we always like to find places where we can either be productive, generative, happy, or have abundance. And you can really see that. There's also latitude crossings. They're known as Purans that are like ley lines for every single person, and they're different for everyone. Those I can't say enough about. They're amazingly accurate. They have a very narrow influence. And today with iPhones and Droids and Google Earth, you can actually pinpoint right where that stuff is. I've had literally people say, well, that's where my good line is. I'm going to go rent, lease, or buy as close to that as I can. And I've done the same thing, and it was amazing. And I can tell you a story. I'll never forget this. This is probably about 30 years ago now. I went to a seminar in a hotel, and I remember saying to the person I was sitting with, we were just talking afterwards, that I have a really malefic line right here. I said, I have a Moon-Mars line. This is not a good place for me, but it's where I went to the seminar. Mm-hmm. So long story short, a couple of minutes later, bang, on the door of the car, I was in the passenger seat, a double-barrel shotgun is staring me right in the face. Wow. I can't make this up. So guys, get out of the car, get out of the car. I looked at her, I said, are you married? So she was. But anyways, I stood up, and he wanted my money. He was holding me up. He says, give me your wallet, give me your wallet. So I threw the wallet on the ground. He picked it up. And I'll tell you what, he's lucky, because I was thinking I could have grabbed that gun, but she was right behind me, and he unloaded on her. So, and anyways, long story short, I no more than I had said that, I got held up with a double barrel shotgun. That's the only time that's ever happened in my life. Wow. But it's interesting. I've had people who said, oh my God, I've gone to this place, and they'll say, it's just bliss. Well, you got a Moon Venus line, you see? So that's one of the things I love in readings with people, is I can go over that and pinpoint stuff like that, just showing them on the maps. And I've actually, this stuff kind of came out strong. Location astrology has been around for hundreds of years. They called them relocation charts. But the map systems have been out only since the late 70s. And what's so great today is I can do readings with people, and they literally are sitting in the comfort of their homes, watching the maps where I'm pointing and showing them and making a video, and then they can watch it back. So, location astrology is amazing. I really enjoy it.
So let's talk about dowsing. What's your experience with dowsing and how that all ties in?
Dowsing's cool. I find you got to be careful with dowsing, because it can be subject to emotion. My first exposure to dowsing was actually in the 70s. I used to work for a guy in a construction company, and we built homes, and we did some commercial work. I'll never forget it. He was actually a drill sergeant in World War II. His name was Joe. And it was the first exposure to dowsing. He said, we got to dig a well. I said, okay. And he goes over and breaks off this stick and comes back with this little fork stick, pointing down. It's like a little, wishbone looking stick, but about 2 feet long. And he starts walking, and sure enough, the stick starts turning. And right where it started turning, about, I think, another 20 paces or so, it stopped and pointed straight down. He goes, water's 20-something feet. And I went, really? And then we started driving the well in, and sure enough, we hit water in about 20, 25 feet. And then, of course, he went a little more just to get the clean water. Mm-hmm. And that was my first exposure. But, yeah, dowsing is good. There's a number of types of dowsing. Most people are used to the pendulum. And, there's a lot of great books on dowsing with all these different gauges. You can look at percentages. I know folks who do trading. I knew one guy in Chicago one time. He was doing futures on cattle, because Chicago was a big cattle town, and where they did a lot of stockyard trading. And he'd sit there with his pendulum and say, well, I'm going to see if I can invest in here in some cattle. And he'd be right on. But then sometimes he was off. He'd lose his butt. So dowsing, I think, is really accurate as long as you're not too attached to it. And I find if you start doing it too much, your emotions can get into it. Mm-hmm. I worked with a treasure hunter once. He was an avid dowser. He used pendulums, and he was absolutely sure he had World War II gold on his property, or not. I'm sorry, Civil War gold. He had Civil War gold, and this was on the East Coast. And he hired me to come out, and I used interrogation astrology to see if he really had that gold there. And this guy was spending money. He had a contractor with a backhoe and a couple of guys with shovels, to look around once they got in there, and he just was certain through his dowsing that there was treasure in this particular area. And I said, I said, the chart says no. So I used interrogation astrology. And it turned out to be right. He certainly didn't find it there. And then we went to another location. He said, I know there's something here. And he was dowsing away. And I said, you're right. I said, the chart says there is something here, but it's going to be a bunch of old iron and twisted stuff. Looks like a garbage dump or something. Sure enough, started digging. That's exactly what we found. A bunch of old bedraggled stuff and cans and just looked like an old dump from maybe, who knows how many years. Can't tell by that in the ground, but that's what it was. So I'm not saying dowsing isn't good. Like, again, the guy with the well, I think it's really accurate for water dowsing because you're not that emotionally attached to it. You're just seeing if the stick turns. And I've done it myself, and it's really accurate. Dowsing rods, you can actually buy dowsing rods. I have copper ones, and they will actually cross. It's pretty magical. They really cross with a lot of force. You can grip them as hard as you want, and they will cross. So I have found accuracy as long as you're not too emotionally attached. The only thing I would say is I find interrogation astrology more accurate only because it's more scientific. You're dealing with data.
So when you're working a paranormal case, do you actually use dowsing as part of your tools?
Not as much. No, I don't. I have, but I pretty much stick to interrogation astrology, electional astrology, mundane, and also the person's birth chart. I use kind of all four of those. I find location astrology, too, has exhibited some interesting stuff. Like, I've had clients who've lived in really weird places. Like, you might say, well, what is that? Well, like a Mars-Neptune line is like the freaking Twilight Zone. I had one client, doctor, lived on this Mars-Neptune line, and the person said to me, what is going on? And I said, well, you live on a Mars-Neptune line. And the next question was, well, what was that going to do? I said, well, confusion and delusion. And that's exactly what they said happened. In fact, found that one of the relationships the person was in, they were stealing things and trying to poison. And it was really like Twilight Zone stuff. And I've seen this a number of times. I've seen people who live like in very violent places like Mars, Pluto, and, it's violent. Stuff happens. You can also have transits and progressions coming through the location area. So in paranormal stuff, I kind of like to look at as much as I can. And I'm much more leaning towards the data that astrology shows because it's very specific. It's very, very specific. So I'm not saying dowsing isn't good. It's just not one of my go-to tools.
Right.
Unless I'm dowsing for water.
So can you share with us an experience that you had with property clearing and how you went about clearing the property of negative energies?
Yeah. That's happened a number of times. I don't do a ton of it because I'm usually busy doing readings, but there are times, and there's some of it I've actually elected not to do when I'm not in good energy points, like I haven't been for a while. But I had one, I can tell. I actually had a judge, and I can't say where or who, but his wife and he came to me. This is probably about 20 years ago, and said, and the judge says, I'm a judge. You can't tell anybody my name. I said, oh, no problem. And he said, I don't believe in this stuff. He says, I'm a linear guy. I've been to college. I don't believe in this stuff. But he said, I got to tell you, we've had 7 maids quit this house. And I myself have experienced so much strange stuff. Howling outside. We don't know what it is. Weird stuff in the house. Things moved. So I cast a chart, an interrogation, and said, I think you got a disincarnate soul there, which a lot of folks would know as a ghost, right? So, and then the wife started telling me of all this strange stuff that was going on in the family. And I said, okay. I said, I could do a clearing if you want me to. And the judge says, yeah, do it. He says, whatever this is, don't want it in my life. I said, okay. So he actually signed a paper so I could go be in the house. They went and got a hotel, and I went in and cleared it. And I did so at a good astrological time. Now, that's something a lot of people that do exorcisms and clearings don't do. But I find that was an ancient method handed down from Egypt, Chaldea, the Middle Ages, Greece, and definitely the Middle Ages, where they would pick an auspicious time to commence these acts. And I have to tell you, it's accurate. It's not my, something I invented. It's something that's very ancient. And you have to follow a number of criteria, and some of them is you certainly want good lunar aspects. I always have the moon separating from malefics and applying to benefics, particularly if they rule the 4th house at the time that I do it. So I do that. And then there's a lot of sacred geometry I use, and I use some very things called notriacon, very sacred things that come actually, believe it or not, out of the Psalms and out of the scripture that are cryptographically contained in there. And see, if you get past English and the Vulgate translations in Latin, you'll find a lot of the ancient scriptures written in Aramaic, Hebrew, and Coptic have ciphers in them. They're literally codes. And these things mean a lot more than they literally mean. And particularly the Psalms are exceedingly powerful. And then there's what we call angelic square. So I do a number of clearing techniques and banishing techniques, and then sealing rites with prayers where you put this sacred scripture, or you could say these codes, on these angelic squares. And I've actually had people bury them on the property or do different things. And it really seems to hold it. It's kind of like washing the floor, then you wax it, and then you seal it. You see, right. It's that kind of a method. And often I find, like this particular instance was an old home that had actually, I don't want to mention names on the air, but it was a brothel. And many years before these people had bought it, and I got that she was pushed off a hill. There was a disincarnate soul there, a girl who was pushed, and she was howling. And of course, there's no time in those spaces and dimensions, and she didn't know that she was dead. And I actually got her to go. To go. Some of them can really be recalcitrant. I had one recently. It was really bizarre. I had a client who had a shipment of furniture that came in from New York. And I'll never forget, it just was so powerful. It was very parasitic and evil. And it was another disincarnate soul. And boy, we had a time with that one. I literally had to incarcerate it. Not that I pretend I'm all omnipotent or powerful, but there are methods that all of us could learn. And the religions have done a poor job at communicating this stuff, to do this. And you can actually do certain prayers that you can pass these entities through and incarcerate them on the astral, especially through intention. And there's very specific methods to do it. And it worked. It certainly cleared. I've had businesses who've had strange stuff and cleared that. And the proof in the pudding is, does it work? I mean, because the skeptics will come along and say, well, we have to prove that. Well, you can't repeat the test for science, you see. So the test is, did it work?
Mhm.
Did you have problems before, and then did it work afterwards? And that's the key. I have had a couple of people who've really had some very serious issues that we've been able to improve it significantly, but sometimes not completely eliminate it. And that was shown in Vedic astrology, where sometimes we have to bear out and dissipate certain energies. And then once those energies dissipate, then it goes away. So that's interesting to compare, actually clearing someone, and then also, can that person be fully cleared? You can always mitigate it and make it better. But like, I've seen people who in Vedic astrology get into really challenging cycles. And I just came out of one recently, and there's almost nothing you can do other than know it and dissipate it. However, knowing it changes the reaction and the severity of it. Like, you're going to operate differently when you know you have a certain energy coming at you than you are if you're just cruising along like life is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's always these hills and valleys throughout life. There's always these different cycles, and everyone is completely unique.
Right. So when you're preparing to do your clearing and we're talking about auspicious times, are you picking these times based off your own energy or off that person's or location's energy?
No, I'm picking, well, it depends. It's not simple. Usually it's called mundane astrology. Mundane means what's happening right now. Mundane astrology affects the world, or you could say the energy that's going on. Like, here's a good example. Mundane astrology could be as simple as there's a new moon, okay? Then there's the first quarter, the full moon, and the fourth quarter. So mundane astrology is picking an auspicious time when the energies of what's happening right now are good. Good means good aspects, and you have to use traditional astrology. Also, like I was mentioning a minute ago, the person's energy is very important too, how that fits with them. Like, I do a lot of gemstone setting for people where I actually will create a pendant or a ring for someone that's very strong, and I set that at a good astrological time. Like, for instance, if I'm setting a gemstone for Jupiter, I will make sure Jupiter is direct and strong and well aspected, but then I will also make sure that time fits the individual's chart, meaning their birth chart. So the same thing is done in clearing. It's advisable to fit all that together. So it's a bit of a challenge and work, but it works out. It works good.
Okay. So we've pretty much touched on it. I'm going to go ahead and ask the question anyways. So when you are working with a client to come up with a custom gemstone, what is the process from start to finish that you use to get that?
Well, that's where Vedic astrology really shines. Vedic astrology is a whole nother world compared to Western astrology. Vedic astrology, there's many branches of Vedic astrology. In fact, the real name of Vedic astrology is called Jyotisha, which means the science of the light of the soul. And in that, there is several branches. One is the birth chart, if you will, or what we would just say, looking at the cycles of the birth chart. And then there's what we call Tajika. There's Nadi astrology, there's Ayurvedic astrology, there's Prashna, which is divinational, and there's Muhurta, which is electional. So when I'm doing a reading or doing something for gemstones, I look at the person's cycles. And there's several ways to look at that. You have something known as doshas in Vedic astrology. The principle behind the ancient astrology is that the soul and the spirit and the psyche are tied to the body at first breath. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes I find birth times or birth certificates may not be to that accuracy. So there I like to read the energy and ask questions and see if it's really accurate. Because Vedic astrology then based on the positions of the lunar zodiac, set something up called the Vimshatori Dasha, and also in Jaimini it's called the Shara Dashas. And those, you can see the cycles each person's in. And depending on where that person is, certain gemstones are good for them and certain ones aren't. There's also certain gemstones that you can wear all your life, doesn't matter what period you're in, and there's other ones you don't want to wear ever. So I take those all into consideration. That's actually called Vedic planetary gemology, which is clearly thousands of years old. It's never changed. A lot of people find that, but I thought my birthstone was a topaz. And the birthstone thing is a modern innovation. All that's come up with the sun sign astrology that all happened again in the last 100 and something years. Prior to that, it's just not that accurate. And I'm not saying people, can't do whatever they want to do. I'm not here to tell anybody what to do. But Vedic planetary gemology, I have found to be exceedingly accurate because I get the feedback. People tell me, oh, yeah, when I wear that, I feel good. But boy, when I wore that, I got headaches or I didn't feel right or it was weird. I'm like, I know. So you can see very specific energy patterns. They're called yogas in Vedic astrology, and you cannot use Western astrology to look at that. It's a whole nother system, including it's a sidereal zodiac. So once you examine that, you can determine which stones are good for a person. And then what I do is one of my specialties is getting untreated gemstones. And everybody on the internet is selling them, and a lot of them don't realize that a lot of these gemstones are heat treated. And they think, well, but, I got this from grandmother's estate, it's 80 years old. They've been heat treating gemstones for hundreds of years. And it's very easy to do. And people say, well, why would they do that? Well, because it darkens the color and lessens the inclusions. Mm-hmm. They look prettier. But a natural stone untreated actually looks much better. And I found India is notorious for heat treating gems. So my specialty is to get untreated stones, and then I cast the metals at a good time, whether it's a ring or pendant, and then I set the stone at a good electional time to the person wearing it. And then there's a whole procedure where you cleanse it 3 times with spring water, you pass it through incense and above a flame, and there's what we call an angelic square. Some people know them as a yantra that you place the gemstone on, or the ring or pendant, and you charge it with a prayer known as a mantra. And we've actually measured these with Kirlian photography and found that they're very powerful when they're charged. So I've done a lot of these, and the feedback I get from people is very, very powerful. I've even had psychics who I've done gemstones for, and they all say, wow, I could really feel that. I did a test once. It was really fun. I had this friend of mine. She's a really great psychic. And I would say, close your eyes. And I'd put these different gemstones in her hand, in her left hand. I said, don't look at it. Just tell me what you feel. And she would describe it to the T. Oh, that one feels like love and really warm. Yep, yellow sapphire, Jupiter. And then I'd say, what do you think of this? Oh, that's bold and strong. Yep, it's the sun, ruby. See, or I'd put an emerald in her hand. She'd go, oh, wow, that's really smart. It's like scintillating. I'm like, yep. So it's really cool. And I really enjoy gemstones for people because they really empower their energy. And in fact, I have a lot of people in business who contact me, and I do it because they know that there's an occult power. That's why kings and queens went after them so much, is because they really do. I actually thought gems were a scam many years ago. And one of my teachers from India said, he said, just hold this, just feel it. And I did. I went, wow. I said, I'm going to buy this thing. And I did. And that really got me fired up. And ever since I went, wow, there's something really to this. And there is. The biggest problem is there's so many lab grown gems out there today, and they're useless. You might as well light your money on fire. Well, it's great in the jewelry store if you want jewelry, but it's not going to give you any energy. So it's very important that you get gems. I always give certs to prove that is the gem it says it is, and it's not treated, because if you buy a treated gem, it's not good.
So you mentioned cycles. So are these cycles, is this something that's set, or is it tied to its kind of its own nature, like lunar cycles and things like that?
Or what kind of cycles? What do you mean? Like personal cycles?
Yeah, let's talk about personal
Oh
cycles.
yeah, everybody's in a personal cycle. I mean, that's the interesting thing about astrology is the minute you're spanked on the rear end in the delivery room, the cycles move forward. And everyone has them, and everyone's really in a different place. You know, like Donald Trump. You know, I mean, I know, God, I can't mention him. I'll have a brick thrown through my window here. I'm in California, but Trump. I said he was going to win the presidency in 2016, and everybody. I had one radio show. They almost hung up the phone on me. They're like, "How dare you say that guy's going to win?" I said, "Well, okay, I'm just telling you what the chart says." You know, so Donald Trump, his astrology fits him so accurate, it's creepy. I mean, he's exactly like his chart. And the only reason I said he was going to win is because he had, at his age, which was almost 70 years old at the time he was born, was a primary directed sun for the first time in his life crossed his ascendant.
Mm-hmm.
First time ever. You know, he could have ran earlier, but he didn't. And he did when he did, and he won. So even though you may like him or hate him, which I'm not here, you know, to get into that whole political nightmare, but he won. And I think he's going to win again. So for those that hate him, get used to him. I think he's going to be around. And for those that like him, they'll be happy. Trump has an exceedingly powerful chart. I just used him as an example, but I see this with a lot of people. Everyone's cycles are you know, life is cycles. I mean, I always say life is a 3-act stage play. Act 1 is from your birth to the first Saturn return, which is when everybody turns about 28 to 29. Act 2 is from that first Saturn return to about 58 or 59, because see, Saturn takes about 28 and a half years to go around the chart. And then Act 3 is from when you're 58 or 59, which is the second Saturn return, to when you're about 84, 86 in that range, because that's your third Saturn return. And that's the end of Act 3. And then I say anything after that's the reprise and the exit music. So we're all in cycles. It never stops from first breath to last.
So during your practice of doing this, I'm sure you've probably casted charts for multiple presidents. What is the one similarity that you see with these presidents?
Well, I haven't certainly done all presidents, but I've looked at a lot. All of them got strong charts. You know, I mean, I think anyone who's a leader, one of the classic things about people who achieve either like a president of a company, or they're business leaders, or they're leaders of society, or they become president or a general, they all have very strong Saturn, suns, and Mars. Trump has all three. Trump has a classic emperor's chart. He has Lord of the Ascendant, he's Leo rising, in the 10th house. What's even more bizarre, remember those 72 angels I was talking about earlier? Mm-hmm. He has the angel on the ascendant, a fixed star. Many Western astrologers will know it as Regulus, but he has that right on the ascendant, which its term is a king's crown sitting on a golden throne waiting to be adorned. Now, whether you like Trump or hate him, one thing's for sure, what does he got around him? A lot of wealth. He look at Trump Towers. It's modeled after Versailles. It's all gold and statues and just this royal stuff, right? So he's got a lot of power in that chart. So whether you love him or hate him, it doesn't matter. He's got the chart. You know, the same thing, even Obama had a very strong chart. So did Bill Clinton. They all have strong charts. Biden actually has a reasonably strong chart. It's just he's not in a cycle right now that's strong at all. And see, that's the other thing. I've seen people who have very strong charts, but they may never become president. It's not in the progressions and transits. And it's a very uncanny thing. I mean, how many people are going to be president? We've only had 40-something of them so far in the last 200 years. So, Yeah, it shows up. I see it invariably, like CEOs of companies or people who are actors or athletes. There was actually a study called the Guaquilin studies, and they had done statistical analysis. Is astrology bunk or is it true? Can you tell from a birth chart whether someone has a propensity to have a certain, skill set and or achievement? Like they ran athletes, they found almost invariably the statistics was way above chance. This is data. This is statistical data that the Mars were always in strong positions. And I have found that repeatedly. See, one of the reasons Trump is so strong is because he has Mars in the ascendant. And that's a double-edged sword for him. That makes him really strong, makes him like the military, makes him, really forceful. But it also can irritate people. That's why he gets people that just go out of their way to see if they can derail him. It's challenging. It's very challenging. And look at his background. He went to military school. He's always been a leader. His father put him in, the real estate business. So whether you like Trump or hate Trump, that's not about this right now. It's like he fits his chart to the T. Trump was also born very close to a full moon and just after a Kalasarpa yoga. Kalasarpa yoga is known as a serpent curse, but Trump doesn't have one. He's got close to one. In fact, by the way, COVID-19 was this whole pandemic that just broke loose, was exactly shown by the astrology. Why? Because a Kalasarpa yoga happened right when it broke loose in this country and the world at large. Even though I think it was probably going on in China much before they said it was. I think it probably manifested in October or maybe even earlier, but certainly right around there. And they just kept a lid on it. And there's a lot of reports about that. They've been incinerating bodies over there like we do garbage here. And they kept the lid on it. And what's interesting is I've been warning for a decade that this would be the time, not the Mayan calendar, but now was the time the world was going to change. And boy, has it. I don't care who you speak to. I speak to people in Europe. I just talked to a couple of shamans down in the jungle over the last couple of months, and they're saying it's shut down there too. This is like in Colombia. This is like in Peru. These people are out in the middle of nowhere, and they can't go into town and get supplies because everything's shut down. Mm-hmm. And if they do, it's very encumbering to get there because the normal transportation isn't available, like river boats or what have you. And it's the same thing we're seeing all over this country and all over the world. I'm talking to people in Europe and Asia and Australia, and it's just shut down. So the astrology showed that, and that was right around the end of February. We had a Kalasarpa yoga form. And a Kalasarpa yoga, for anybody listening, is when all the planets are in between the moon's north and south node. Now, Vedic astrologers will call the south node Ketu and the north node Rahu. So all the planets, if you look at any astrology chart right now, you'll see all the planets are grouped between those. Well, guess what? That breaks right around the latter part of May. This is all going to start to break up in the end of May into June. That's why, even though I know certain states are going to keep restrictions on, they're not going to be able to keep the lid on this. And what's even more interesting is the moon's north and south nodes were in lunar mansions that typically evoke times like this. Why this one was so much more severe is because we had something called a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January. And that's the one I've been warning about for probably 10, 12 years. Everyone said, what do you think of the Mayan calendar? I said, not much. But I said, watch 2020 through 2021. This is when the world changes. Plus, we have a very important cycle coming up at the end of this year, December 21st, which many people will recognize as the winter solstice. We're going to have a 240-year renewal of Saturn and Jupiter entering a new tropical what we call element, like earth, air, fire, and water.
Mm-hmm.
And these configurations, Saturn and Jupiter join every 20 years. But this one is unique because I think it's going to usher in the new technology revolution. Technology is already very advanced, but the last time this happened like this, it brought in the Industrial Revolution. Even though the Industrial Revolution was already beginning, it really kind of accelerated it. It's when people go, this could really work and we're going to go that way. It's the same thing now, except I think we're going to see it accelerate much faster. I would predict in the next 10, 20 years, it's going to get like the Jetsons. We're going to see research and advances in areas that are going to blow our minds. A lot of this technology's been around. I think Tesla discovered many of the secrets to energy and free energy because he knew how to get around the dielectric what we call barriers in atomic energy. So, yeah, we all know about nuclear bombs and fission, but I think he knew how to get into and release perpetual energy out of just matter, out of certain types of matter. And we hear about this, like, cold fusion and all this. I think it's all real. And I think it can't happen fast because the economic structures are based on petrochemical materials, but it's going to happen. And I think this whole event here may help usher that future in. I think starting next year, you're going to see a consciousness happen and a change and shift that's going to be pretty profound. It's going to be pretty profound. And with computerization, we could see flying cars in 10 years, maybe sooner. We've already got them.
Yeah.
It's just when it becomes commercially feasible.
So, back kind of ranging back to the COVID-19, what does the chart say? I mean, are we looking at things to get worse before they get better, or are we pretty much over?
No,
that?
I think if I'm reading the charts right, this Kalasarpa Yoga breaks right at the end of this month. And what's even better, see, AIDS, SARS, all kinds of stuff breaks out. Every 18 and a half years, the moon's north and south node enter these lunar mansions called Ardra and Mula. And we just moved out of Ardra in April. So it got a little better. See, notice everybody, certain places it's thawing out. Like a lot of people are rebelling. A lot of people are saying, I'm not doing this anymore. And many of the governors are lessening the restrictions. Others still are keeping them on, like New York and LA and other places. But in general, it's getting better. I think by this summer, it's going to get a whole lot better. And the moon's south node in September, about September 20th to be exact, moves out of the south node called Mula, which is a very toxic. If you go back, even JFK was killed on this. And if you go back, there was some stuff too, like around the Korean War, Vietnam, all this weird stuff always happens every time these north nodes, by the way, are mathematical points. It's where the sun and the moon and the earth line up in their orbital paths. That's where eclipses happen, like either a lunar or solar eclipse. And everyone knows eclipses have an effect that you can feel them. So even though, a lot of people look at them and nothing happens and all that, but they have an indelible effect on, and there's a lot of data to show that, on the direction of society. So what's interesting is this south node moves out of this lunar mansion right in September, which would I would say if we get a reoccurrence, it's probably not going to be anything like this. And again, they're scurrying around to get vaccinations and microchips in everyone. So I hope it isn't forced on everyone, but they'll do what they'll try and do. I think this is going to leave an indelible effect on society, but it doesn't look like it's getting worse. And look at the numbers. There's been many doctors out there who have said, especially since April, when the North Node moved out of that very toxic combination of Ardra and Mula together, it's gotten better. Remember what they were saying? Oh, there's going to be hundreds of thousands of people are going to die. They're going to be dying in the streets. Well, I mean, to my knowledge, they just sent home the 2 Navy ships because nobody was in them. They just left L.A. Harbor. Another one's leaving New York. I mean, look at all the ventilators. I mean, it's millions of masks, and nobody's of course everyone's wearing masks, but the numbers have not come out like they said they were going to, and the death rate is much lower. And I've also had a lot of people tell me in the medical profession that the numbers may even be skewed at that. Like I've heard, if you die from the flu, the hospital gets $3,000. If you die and you write down COVID-19, well, now they get $13,000 or $18,000. If you put them on a ventilator, you get $38,000. Now that's not bad for having someone die. Huh? I mean, it's really hideous what you hear. I mean, it's horrible that it's financially more advisable for the hospital to write down COVID-19 or say they were on a ventilator because they get more money. So, and I've heard this isn't my opinion. I'm hearing this from doctors who I've talked to directly, and they're saying the numbers are skewed and they can't get a voice on the Mind Control News. So it's very mysterious. And again, these kinds of things tend to rear their heads when these astrological conditions exist. And I've been warning about this time for a long time. I think this is also going to have a huge effect, not only on the financial structures, but I think we're going to see China and the United States do a lot of decoupling. And I pray and hope, and may everyone else, that we never see anything other than financial trouble between us and China, because we certainly don't want to see any wars. And it leans towards that not happening, at least the best I can see. But I can tell you, I think this is going to leave an indelible impact on the world at large, as well as the United States. But we're going to come back. People are strong. We're going to come back. And the astrology leans towards, we're not going to lose everyone. I mean, look at the 1917 pandemic, the so-called Spanish flu, which they say may have come out of China as well. Do you know that they estimate, and nobody knows for sure, but there could have been up to 100 million people died globally. They documented 50 plus million people, but they said it was just colossal. And, that was also too, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have iPhones and everybody, wearing masks, though they did back then, but much later. So, we probably did prevent a huge pandemic because of everyone doing what they did. But I was kind of amazed at how accurate the astrology paralleled when that happened. In fact, even in the London flu, the London Black Plague, so-called Black Plague, these same conditions were existent. There's other factors, astrologically, but these same lunar mansions were at play. So it's amazing. If you go back through history and look at this, it's really amazing.
Okay. Angie has joined us on our live chat here, and she asks, so you don't think there's going to be a second wave of it? She's in Scotland and still under lockdown.
A lot of people are. I was just talking to a guy in Belgium. They're under lockdown, yeah. Talked to another guy in the Canaries. They're under lockdown. Yeah, it's going on all over. So what's her question?
Her question is do you think that there's going to be a second wave of it?
Well, I don't want to tell you what I think, but I'll cast a chart and look at it. Okay. If there is, it's not going to be like they had anticipated. No. Leans more towards no.
Okay.
Well, and let's pray that that's right. I mean, the social distancing, I don't want to demean this thing because it certainly was real, but also there, again, I'm talking to people who are doctors and they're saying the numbers just don't add up, and they get taken right off of YouTube. They get taken right off of social media. Nobody wants to hear that. So there may be other motivations going on here, but it leans towards no.
Okay, so what can we look for? What's in it for us for the rest of the year and into 2021?
Well, this is, it's an election year. We're all going to be brunting the virtual insanity of the media. I'm always amazed. There used to be campaigns where you had, candidates running their campaigns. Not that they don't, but now you have news media outlets running campaigns. You have Fox backing Trump and a few other stations. You have CNN backing Biden and MSNBC. I've never seen a political insanity like this. And the astrology shows that this situation with William Barr, Durham, this whole Obamagate thing is probably going to end up being a lot bigger than people think. And I think we're going to see events that are unprecedented in United States history with this event coming up by this summer and fall. That's what the chart says. And the reason I say that is right now we have a Venus retrograde going into the sun. That's called an inferior conjunction. And speaking of Mayan calendars, that's not the Mayan calendar, but the Mayans knew. They called that the Quetzalcoatl effect. The Europeans call it Lucifer falling, meaning Venus going retrograde into the alignment with the sun, with the earth. And that is a time, it's kind of like that song, One Night in Baghdad. It's like the tough guys tumble. This is going to be very eventful, what we see here between now and the fall. We're going to see a lot happening, and we could see, again, a very tumultuous year on many levels of the political scene, the news scene, and I hope we don't see any violence. You know, a lot of police officers are warning about that kind of stuff, you know, where people could not only revolt over COVID-19, but you know, I mean, this whole electional thing and some of the things that are about to come out, I think, are going to be very unsettling for the American public. And globally, I think this financial situation is, you know, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction didn't happen just in the United States. It's happening to the whole world. And this is a time of great, great change. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some very substantial changes to the financial global system as well. That's what the astrology says. I've always said this is the time when we see change, major, major change. And technologies are going to really change the future. And we're already seeing it, you know, we're already seeing it.
So, wow, I just totally lost my train of thought there for a second. So, it's really big stuff. So, there's a lot of talk of governments pushing for this like one world order type deal going on here. So,
that's exactly what I was just talking about.
Yeah. So, are we starting to kind of see that in the charts actually going to come to fruition?
I think it's being attempted right now. I think, you know, I mean, take a look at what's going on right now in the House right now in the United States. They're pushing to literally exonerate all the illegal aliens, give them a bunch of cash, give them, you know, we're seeing some unprecedented moves right now. And, you know, I don't want to say too much on the air, but I think that we've had undercurrents of communism infiltrating this country for a long, long time. And that is all coming to a head. It's not as transparent, but it is. And again, I definitely say there are forces, I don't want to say, you know, implicate here, but that's what this astrology shows, is that we are now at probably one of the most critical times in modern history of not only finances, but how our world ends up. And I think this election is critical to that. And again, you know, so many people hate Trump. So many people like Trump. I've never seen a polarization quite like this. Mm-hmm. And there are forces behind this that are very unbeknownst to, I think, the general populace. And this is what the astrology shows. This is the time when freedom and fascism collide. And it's here. And people are so invested into their opinions. I mean, I talk to people, they're ready to go to war over their opinions politically. And I'm like, wow, you know, I've just never seen people this animated by politics, opinions, and feelings of suppression like this. And this is exactly what the chart shows.
Mhm.
I think we're going to see a resolution to this, and it leans towards they're not going to get displaced. I think the nationalism effect is going to take strong effect as we move into next year. The United States has a birth chart as well. It's known by many astrologers as the Sibley chart. Now, many astrologers use different charts, and that's all fine. But no matter which chart and by the way, that means when the Declaration of Independence was signed, concretizing the United States as a separate entity from England. That's the chart that people use. There's dispute as to when it was signed. Was it 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock, or the next day? But whatever. I can tell you the United States is going to have a Pluto return. First time in 240 something odd years in 2022. And it happens 3 times. That's just 2 short years away. It's actually about a year and a half away. And we also have, if the chart I'm using is correct, for the first time ever, by primary direction, Pluto is going to cross the midheaven of the United States charts. And people say, well, okay, what does that mean? Well, powerful, powerful forces that are going to be contended with in the world. I, again, hope and pray we never see mushroom clouds, laser beams, or any other kind of stuff, chemical warfare on the horizon. But this is the kind of stuff that's on the table with the polarization we see. And it's always about the money. If you look at World War I and World War II, it was all about the money. It was all about power and control and fascism. You know, granted, you know, Hitler was doing some very hideous stuff, and you know, it needed to be stopped. And but you look at the power structures that were rearranged there too, behind the scenes in the financial worlds. And this is what's going on right now. I've been hearing about this for years. I've actually got some clients, I shouldn't mention where, but they're actually in very powerful banking positions that I've talked to over the years and still keep in touch with and call from time to time. And they're looking at different astrological things, and they're very well aware of this too. You got to remember, George Washington, the founding fathers of this country, were steeped in Masonry, steeped in it. In fact, there's a picture, a mural with George Washington laying the cornerstone of the capital of this country at a good astrological time. So, you know, this is kept very close to the vest because publicly astrology is considered to be wackoville, you know, incense and beads and predicting the future. But it's actually a real science, and it goes back to antiquity. Some of the mundane astrology, they talk about Noah, you know, actually knowing about it. And there's actually antediluvian charts that come pretty close to when that flood may have actually happened. And we got scientists carbon dating it. You know, so it's interesting stuff. You know, astrology is really a science of the influence of the heavens on the souls on earth. I really believe we're all souls having a physical experience, and we're not the astrology, but it's kind of the influence on the soul to purify it and rectify it. And there's many texts that actually support that. So back to the question at hand, the astrology shows if there was ever a time in modern human history, we're in it. This is it. This is a big time. And the small little things that are going on are going to have huge effects over the next several years, several decades.
Absolutely. Angie, I saw that you tried to call in. If you wanted to try to call back in again, we'll get you on. Oh, okay. So she hit it by mistake. Okay. So what other predictions do you have for us coming up?
Well, I would say the cycles are what I've mentioned. You know, these are the main ones on the radar screen right now. I think between now and summer, fasten your seatbelt. We got a front row seat to some insanity. And I think you're going to see many people upset over this whole situation that's brewing right now. I've been saying there's a mole that's been tunneling under Washington very deeply for a while, and his name might be John Durham and William Barr. And I really think we're going to see a lot more come out of that than meets the eye, and there's going to be extreme opposition to it. And it's going to be an eventful year. We have, for the first time ever, so many things adding up. We got Venus retrograde right now between now and the first part of June. When it goes direct at the end of or into July, then we've got Mars ready to retrograde in August, and it just keeps on going. This is not only an election year, but it's also a very pivotal time, and it's going to be actually Mars goes retrograde in September, so it'll be stationing in August. So it's a powerful time. This is a time when we're going to see the world really get rearranged. And I think the whiplash effect with China on all of this is going to have a tremendous effect on the way many automated industrial jobs back here. And it's going to be a major change. I just hope the word war isn't in our future. And so far as I can see, it leans towards not, but there's some dicey stuff coming up over the next couple of years that I hope, we just fly through it and get on with our business and everybody stay safe and happy.
So with all the changes that are going on now that are going to continue to happen, when can we expect this to kind of just stable out and smooth?
I think, well, I would definitely say after next year. The Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. We just had the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. That happens about every 35 to 38 years. And just an FYI, for people who might not be familiar with what I'm speaking about, every time Saturn and Pluto conjoin, something major happens. World War I broke out within weeks of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 1914. Then World War II ended on the next one, coming right forward. Then Nixon took us off the gold standard on the next one. Then if we keep paging forward, 9/11 happened on the Saturn-Pluto opposition, and the banks crashed in 2008 and 2009 on the square. We just had the conjunction. The entire world, never before in modern history at least, have we seen the entire world get shut down. It's like somebody pulled a big switch and turned it off. So what's positive to me is we have this kind of renewal situation coming up with the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. And this particular configuration hasn't happened in 240 years. And when does it happen? On the winter solstice of this coming year, December 21st. It's right on it. And I think that's going to be the marker when all the pieces get done and everything, all the shrapnel's pulled out of the wall, metaphorically, hopefully no real shrapnel. I think that's when we're going to start to see the page turn and a new chapter start to be written. And some of this political insanity, I think, is going to start to settle. And, no matter how you slice this election, people are so polarized in the United States. There's going to be a lot of happy people and a lot of angry people, no matter who wins. And I see it's going to be Trump. I think he's going to win like a freight train going through a wet paper bag. That's what I think. That's what the chart says, at least. And I don't see it being stopped. And that's going to make a lot of people angry. It's going to make a lot of people happy. I'm just seeing what the chart says. So, that dissension on that element will probably start to settle. And I really think this COVID thing is going to kind of blow away, kind of like AIDS did. Not that AIDS ever went completely away, but it settled down. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And same thing with SARS and all that. I think there's a lot more behind this COVID-19 thing than meets the eye. I'll say that.
Okay, thank you, Jeff, for joining us this evening to share the wonderful world of astrology with us. It has been an amazing journey.
It's a journey.
It is.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for coming on.
You are very welcome, my friend. You take care.
Yes, you too. All right, don't miss out tomorrow, 9 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. We will be having Christy from Soul Sisters Paranormal with us to discuss hauntings, investigation techniques, and how to protect yourself, the equipment that they use, and even share some of their own experiences. Also, stemming back to Paranormal Help Desk is coming up with an event on May 1st, 2021. It's going to be at multiple locations with multiple teams and a whole lot of give back. And this is going to be for doctors, nurses, mental health workers, respiratory therapists, paramedics, police officers, EMT, firefighters, healthcare workers in general, and frontline workers. The paranormal community would like to extend their sincerest gratitude for all that you do. This will be a free paranormal experience for you and a guest. Location and reservation info will be coming at a later date, so watch on Facebook for more information on that. Mark your calendars, and you can find more information at the Paranormal Help Desk on Facebook. Thanks again for listening, and as always, stay safe and stay healthy.
If you enjoyed our show tonight, head on over to Paranormal Engaged on Facebook and stay up to date on the latest news. And don't forget to click that like button. To find more about upcoming shows and guest information, stop by www.paranormalengaged.com. Paranormal Engaged can be found on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, and can be played on Alexa with a Podbean skill.